Well, the time has come to reassemble our Mystery Polebarn Find 3D3. Now remember, the idea behind this engine is just to save it. So we're reusing a lot of the original parts because they were perfect. Engine was stuck because a couple of cylinders had rusted themselves to the cylinder walls. But other than a new set of rings and fresh gaskets, it's going back together again with all of the stuff that it came from. So now it's time to assemble it. And you say to yourself, hey, I bet you he's going to do a video about assembling a short block. And I'm going to say, no, I'm not, because I already did it. We already did an assembly video on like the exact twin to this engine, the one that's in this car right now, a few years ago. And it's already got like 350,000 views. It's a popular video. So rather than go over those steps all over again with the same engine, the same color, the same parts, the same procedures, I figured, let's do something a little bit different, something that might be helpful for somebody who's gonna attempt their first engine job. So, we've covered the assembly. There's a link to that video in the description of this video. So if you're not interested in like the pre-game part of this, just skip ahead to that. But I think this is important because somebody who's just learning how to build an engine needs to understand that there are certain accepted practices or best practices. And like your success is going to be based on how closely you follow those best practices. Now, as I've said 1,000 times before, I am not an engine builder, okay? Not an engine builder. I'm an engine assembler. I have assembled hundreds of these things, and I've done it with engine builders in clean rooms, and I've laid under race cars in gravel parking lots with debris blown all over the place and assembled engines that way too. You name it, been there, done it, got the t-shirt. But typically when you're going to assemble an engine, there's a certain layout and there's a certain order of procedure that you're going to want to follow to make sure that this thing goes together right the first time. So we're going to talk about, well, we already prepped the block and cleaned it and all that other stuff. And we prepped and cleaned and we measured everything else, and we've matched pistons to bores. We've got the biggest piston going into the biggest bores. All of this very time-consuming stuff. And we've talked about it, we've covered it all up to this point. But now let's talk about right before you're ready to assemble your engine. What's the setup? How do you make this thing so that it's organized and clean? And clean is really important here now. Not surgical clean, right? But close to it. You want to, cleanliness has got to stay at the forefront, and organization has got to stay at the forefront of your mind. And your mind, this is very important, okay? Very important. When you're going to tackle a job like this, whether it's your first one or your 1,000th, it doesn't make any difference. You approach this with immaculate sanity, okay? You don't do it when you're exhausted. You don't do it when you're rushed. You don't do it when you're compromised. Okay, a lot of guys are like, oh, I'll just crack open a couple of beers and put my engine together. No, don't ever do that. I'll tell you a quick story, right? I guess about a dozen years ago or so, I had a friend of mine, Matthew, who was putting together a hot rod Edsel. So he goes and he buys this built like maximum FE motor from this guy, local guy, that's known to build FE motors. So Matt puts it in the car, gets it running, and the engine runs like 15, 20 minutes, and it just goes through this total ritual of self-destruction. I mean, it just ate itself alive. So he calls me over, and I'm looking at this thing, and it's knocking and rapping, it's horrible, okay? So I says, and he can't get a hold of the guy. So I says, Matt, pull this thing back out, right? And tear it apart and lay it out across the floor, and let's see if we can figure out what went wrong with this thing. So that's what he does. Takes the engine out, takes it all apart, and lays it out from the oil pan, the crankshaft, pistons and rods, all that stuff, all across the floor. So now he calls me over, and I'm starting to examine it, right? And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I start at the bottom, at the oil pan. And I notice that everything is very neat. You know, the corners of the pan gasket have just perfect amounts of little blobs of silicone in the corner to seal up leaks, and everything looks really nice. And as I'm going through, okay, I noticed things start to get a little sloppier when we get up to like the cylinder heads. They were a little grungy, and there were a couple of bolts that had been cross-threaded into the cylinder heads. And then there's a valley pan, like a baffle that's in there, and I'm looking at this, and it's grungy, and it's got silicone just globbed all over the place. And this is from the bottom of the engine to the top of the engine. So I stepped back and I looked at it. I says, Matt, I don't know what exactly went wrong with this thing, but I tell you what, whoever put it together was drunk. He goes, why do you say that? I says, because look, he started this job. He had the engine, had the block on the stand, right? And he started the job on the bottom, and everything is just so perfect. It's all put together just right. Okay, you can see that there was a lot of care here. All of the parts are clean and everything else. Now, the closer you get to the top of the engine, the sloppier stuff gets, until you get to this valley pan, and it's got globs of silicone and grease and dirt and stuff like that in the corners. You got cross-threaded bolts in the intake manifold. I says, the guy cracked open a beer when he started this job, and he was like on 8 or 9 when he finished. So God only knows what happened in between. So he says, you know what? He says, I had a hunch. I said, why is that? He says, because when I went to pick up this engine, there were beer cans, empty beer cans all over his shop. I was like, see, I told you. When you're going to do this stuff, nothing, okay? No mind-altering substances of any sort, right? Just you and your engine. That should be enough. If it's not enough, then you're in the wrong line. You know, you're playing with the wrong game, okay? So I just needed to get that out there. All right, so basic setup here. Block is clean, and before I assemble it, I'm going to blow it with compressed air just to make sure that nothing found its way in and nothing's going to be in, you know. So I'm going to blow through all of the various passages and just dust the motor off with compressed air before I go ahead and do it. Notice the only parts of this block right now that have any oil on them are the cylinder walls. I clean them and wipe them down with transmission fluid just to preserve them, but everything else is bone dry. And you want to keep it that way until you're finished with assembly, because you don't want anything getting stuck to the motor. You don't want, you know, dirt that flies through the air or whatever, you know, moths, whatever is going to stick to the motor because it's got oil on it. Yeah, leave it so that there's just dust is the only thing that can settle on it, and you blow it off real quick. So, block is ready to go. Now, we've got our crank covered. We cleaned it. It's just gasoline, and then took pipe cleaners and went through the oil passages. Typical procedure. But it's clean, and it's been sitting in a plastic bag. So again, nothing sticks to it. Nothing crawls, you know. Just keep it nice and clean. Now we've got our table. So this should be considered an important part of any engine assembly. You need an organized area to lay out your parts and tools. And this is how, I didn't set this up for a video, I set this up because this is how I plan on putting this engine together. So there's nothing, I didn't do anything out of the ordinary here. This is what we got. Our pistons and rods are all assembled, right? So in other words, the bearings are on them, and the bearings are in the rods, and the rings are on them. And the rings, this was a set of standard rings that we checked on the board before we went any further to make sure that everything was good, and then we assembled it. If you're dealing with an engine, a custom engine, something that's been overboard, you're using different pistons in it, whatever it happens to be, then you got to take that extra little step and make sure that the rings are gapped correctly. In our case, we're just putting this thing together with the stock gap. We didn't bother with any of that stuff on it because this engine is just going to go in the mule, and the idea here is just let's see what it's going to do the way it was years ago when it was put together, back in the 70s. We just want to duplicate what it was. So we didn't do anything fancy with it. There's no intention of putting nitrous or boost or anything like that, so we just took our standard rings. We made sure that the gap was accurate. We tested a couple of them on different bores, and the gap is fine, so we didn't mess with that. But our pistons are laid out, and they're numbered 1, 3, 5, 7, and then the fatter ones, you see I have this little plus here. The skinnier ones, because we measured the widest part of the piston, and we talked about that in that video we did on pistons. So Remember, they're barrel shaped, so we measured them to find which were the widest and which were the narrowest, and we mated them up with the cylinders that were the biggest and the smallest. So that's what the plus and minus signs are on these. So these are fitted to the bores as best as we can without getting into anything fancy, and they're ready to drop in. We've got our main caps ready to go. We've got our main bearings, and these were the ones that came out of the engine. They show zero wear. I mean, this engine really was in exceptionally good condition, but these showed zero wear, so they're going to go back in. We've got our caps cleaned and in order. We've got our oil sealed cap. Special. These things are a pain if you're not aware. These big block Mopars use a 3/8 12-point socket, which is hard to come by. Most of your 3/8 sockets are 6-point, but 3/8 12-point socket if you're ever trying to get one of these things apart. So that's our hardware that's going to go into this engine. We've got our gaskets and our complete gasket set laid out, so it's self-explanatory. You're always going to be reaching into that. And we left this little area in front of ourselves right here so that we have a place to assemble things, right, and put our tools down or whatever. Now, the tools. I don't like using any type of power tool on assembling an engine, so I use a speed wrench, manual speed wrench. This way, you can feel each bolt as it's going in, and if it's got a tight spot or anything like that, you can stop that in and then go back and check it out. I know people are like, what, did you tap all of the threads? Actually, I did tap the threads on the water pump housing, but none of the other threads needed to be tapped. The engine came apart. I took it apart by hand. All those bolts came out nice and pretty, so they will all go back in. There won't be any problem there. But yeah, best practices is, yes, tap all your threads. So I've got my speed wrench there because, like I says, I don't like to use power tools when assembling an engine. 9/16 half-inch deep socket, and that's going to be for the rod bolts and all of that. This is for the main caps. We've got our torque wrench ready to go. And just assortments of hand tools that I know are going to be used to assemble this short block. You don't want to keep running back and forth to your toolbox every time you think you need something. So pre-game, in your layout there, make room for the tools and pick out the tools that you know you're going to need. Sometimes you forget something, you have to go back. But the idea is, once you're in this area assembling the engine, and you're in the zone of assembling the engine, you don't have to leave it. You don't have to leave your area, you don't have to leave your zone. You just stay there and zen in on your engine. And that's why you want to put all of this stuff out ahead of time. You don't have to think about it. The time to think about building your engine is before you start building your engine. Okay, so torque wrench, sorted hand tools and sockets that I know I'm going to need for this particular job. Our piston ring compressor and the 1/4-inch drive ratchet and an extension for it, so that's all ready to go. We've got our hammer that we're going to use to push the pistons down and then tap them, right? So I'm using just a rubber mallet for that, but you could use any hammer with a soft handle. A couple of screwdrivers. We've got our socket and on a breaker bar to turn the motor over as we go along. And then we've got our yellow weather stripping adhesive, and I like to use this stuff for sticking gaskets to the engine. Right? Don't use silicone. Silicone is not going to hold the gasket. The yellow weather stripping adhesive will hold it. Use silicone like in the corners of stuff where you have to seal leaks or potential leaks. But to stick the gasket to the engine or the part, I like to use, like I said, the yellow weather stripping adhesive. We've got our assembly lube. I use all different kinds of things. Somebody gave me a bunch of this a while back. This is like my last tube of this, so we'll use this. But I've used STP, Lucas, any type of, Motor Honey, that sort of stuff as an assembly lube. Silicone. Now, the cam and lifters are going back in the engine. We saved the lifters. They're in the correct order that they came out, so they're going to go back to the lobes that they came from. So I'm not really worried about breaking. It was broken in half a century ago. We're just going to put it all back together again the way it was. But Given the fact that everything has been dried and cleaned and so on and so forth, I don't want the lifters to experience any periods of, let's say, even just a couple of seconds of oil starvation where they have a chance to, like, you know, break the pattern, hurt the pattern. So when I reassemble this thing, we'll be using this assembly lube for high pressure points. So, and if you have some cam lube, you can use that, but either way, take that extra little step and protect, even if you're using, like we are, the lifter, the cam and the lifters, take that little bit of extra step to protect the lobes. We got our silicone. I always keep a squirt bottle full of gasoline, right? Because you're going to need to clean things as you go along. You're going to need to clean tools. Your hands are going to get all greasy as you go along, you know, covered with oil. So in between, like for instance, after you're done putting in a piston and rod in the engine, stop, right? Grab a shop towel, a lint-free towel, okay, and some gasoline. Give it a squirt on your hands and clean the oil off before you go to the next step. After you're done with each tool, don't put it back down covered with oil or anything like that. A little gasoline on a rag, wipe it down so that this way you're not, because it starts off like innocent enough. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, oh, just a little oil on this wrench, and the next thing you know, it's got everything stuck to it, right? So in between, every time you go to put a tool back down to rest, give it a quick wipe. It's a couple of extra seconds, but it makes the overall job much nicer, and it keeps your head clear and keeps your hands clean. Look, I'm doing this with filthy hands because I'm not ready to assemble yet, but when I'm ready to assemble this thing, my hands will be clean. Let's see. WD-40, you need WD-40 for your piston ring installer. You know, you want to keep it lubricated with a light oil. WD-40 works perfectly for that. And of course, when you're going to screw bolts into the engine, because you've cleaned these things now with gasoline and you've taken all of the oil off the threads. So you don't want to oil the threads, but you do want a light lube on them, and WD-40 works perfectly as a light lube for your head bolts and main bolts and everything else. So the PB Blaster works fine, but just a light film of it. Don't go crazy with it. If too much oil will affect torque readings. So keep that in mind. But you do need some kind of lubricant. You don't want to screw everything together dry. All right, so that's that. We've got our oil pump back together again. We've got white lube in there. You could use grease. I like to use white lube for it. So before we put it together, we coated the gear and the rotor with white lube. So this thing, as soon as it turns, it's going to start sucking oil. So that's good. Damper, seal. Okay, so those parts are just clean and ready to go on. Let's see. We've got, this is an important step you should always consider. So here's our timing chain set, okay? And a day before you're ready to put this together, you want to take the timing chain and drop it into a thing. I like to use transmission fluid for it because transmission fluid soaks in. So before you assemble it, as is a day before, drop the chain into some ATF and let it soak. Let it get in between the rollers. So this way, timing chains on a lot of engines really don't get the oil that they deserve or they need. So you don't want to let this thing run for a minute or so before there's enough oil splashed around to keep it happy. So that's why soak it at a time. And then, you know, a little wastebasket, because as you're taking stuff out of wrappers and out of boxes or whatever it is, cleaning things, throwing paper towels, have a place to toss them so that you're not tripping over, you know, a bunch of, you know, refuse. So I think I covered pretty much all of the things that would be important to pre-game your engine assembly. Of course, there's probably a couple of things I left out. And of course, there may be things specific to your engine that don't apply to this one that you want to have ready to go for yourself. So That's it. Next time you see this thing, the short block will be together. And if I run into any unique situations or problems with it, I'll make a video about it. But if not, it's just routine, and we already covered every single one of these steps on like this exact engine, painted that exact color, and will be a link to that video in this description. So, all right, that's it. Enough of this. I'm gonna clean my hands, I'm gonna clear my head, and I'm gonna put this sucker together. I'll see you tomorrow.